Some patients were cutting, crushing, even nibbling tablets to get to the right dose. In my book, no one should be nibbling a medicine in the 21st century. We should just know what the right dose is. Looking back on today will be seen as somewhat archaic.
Welcome to Health in Hyperdrive, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of healthcare. I'm Dominic James, and today I'm joined by Hakim Yadi, the biotech entrepreneur with a PhD in immunology and an OBE awarded for services to healthcare technology and the economy. What is precision medicine?
The idea behind precision medicine is to have a more precise, more efficacious, fewer side effects therapy for an individual. You've got a wild west of Instagram and TikTok and Reddit channels where people are working it out for themselves. They're doing N of 1 medicine for themselves, and it's pretty dangerous.
What could the future look like?
Now, with the advent of genomics, of new technologies, algorithms for better clinical decision making, we're getting to a point where precision medicine is really becoming something we can't ignore.
Hakim, welcome to Health in Hyperdrive.
Thank you so much for having me, Dominic.
Well, I think maybe a good place to start for us, Hakim, is really defining what is precision medicine.
So I like to think of precision medicine as being the thing that patients would expect to receive, as in patient presents themselves to a physician and they get something that is appropriate for them as an individual, given the condition they have and the medication. I find it somewhat amusing that we even have the term precision medicine, because that must mean that there is another side of medicine which is imprecise. And actually that is what the vast majority of medicine is, not for any fault of the physicians or the health systems, but because we haven't had the information to accurately deliver the right drug for the right patient at the right dose at the right time. And now, with the advent of genomics, of new technologies, algorithms for better clinical decision making, we're getting to a point where precision medicine is really becoming something we can't ignore.
So I would have thought that's basically a given, that people get, like, I feel like when I go to the doctor and the doctor says 2 of these a day, I'm the right patient, he knows what my condition is, and it's the right medicine. Is that not how kind of things are working?
It is the right type of medicine for that moment in time, and in relation to that is all that we have available to us. So based on the fact that you are presenting as you as the individual with that condition, that's the right medication. But if we think about the backstory to that medication, that is a medication that has been trialed and tested through the research programs, the clinical trials, often optimized for a patient cohort. And if you think that most medicines now are generic, which means they would have been discovered back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when most of the clinical trials were run on 70-kilo white males, that means that actually for many patients, the dose of the drug that's been prescribed might be incorrect. And what we're thinking about here is that with every medication, there is a balance between the efficacy, how it works, and potential side effects. Now, for you as an individual, it might be perfectly okay, but for the next patient coming in with a very similar set of conditions and prescribed that same medication, it might not be. Or at a more granular level, understanding the specific mutation of a cancer and making sure you prescribe the right drug for that mutation as opposed to the disease. So the physicians are trying their best to be precise, but they don't have the tools and technologies available. We are now seeing those being developed by innovators both in pharma, in medtech, and digital healthcare companies. And that's why I say we're now getting to the point where we should be demanding and expecting precision medicine as opposed to imprecise medicine.
Yeah, and I worked in pharma, and I started to get into reading clinical trials. I'd never done that before I'd worked in pharma, and you suddenly realize that the data that's kind of coming out of clinical trials is, it's based on often like just a couple of hundred people, and that's what gets kind of approved to then be the sort of the dosage of drugs. So, it could be a couple of hundred people. It could have been a few years ago. It could be the wrong type of person. Me, typically, I'm probably in good shape. 80 kg male, yeah. White. I'm probably all right. But for the 90% of people who are not that, that's also a challenge. But then also clinical trials don't take into account things specific about me as well, right? So that's kind of another part of it. So precision medicine is all about getting much more precise about these things.
Exactly, and you raise a really interesting point there. One of the other big areas where we've really lacked that precision is in women's health, because most of the medicines were optimized for men. There's a huge amount of the women's health agenda that is assuming that they are smaller males. And so, exactly as you say, the idea behind precision medicine is to have a more precise, more efficacious, fewer side effects therapy for an individual.
I think maybe this is a good point to talk about your background. I did the introduction. You've run a precision medicine company. You've worked in government and policy. You're now in kind of consulting and advisory. Could you tell me a little bit about that kind of that story?
Yeah, very happy to. It's a journey that I've been on from a very young age. I've always been fascinated by the natural world. From a young child watching David Attenborough, I thought I was going to be a zoologist, and I actually fortunately got to meet Sir David and tell him that he'd inspired me, which was quite a moment. But that passion for sort of understanding the natural world has always been a driver for me. It led me to do my undergraduate degree in biology, led me to my PhD, and then I rapidly became more and more interested in the application of the science for the benefit of human health and understanding. And so I moved from the academic environment into an advisory environment, helping set up some of the academic health science institutes, working very closely between the NHS and industry and joint partnerships. Off the back of that, worked with the UK government on the implementation of the first version of the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy, working with our colleagues around the world in the Foreign Office and really promoting UK PLC as an opportunity for life sciences. And then ended up being recruited up to the north of England to run something called the Northern Health Science Alliance, an alliance of teaching hospitals, universities, and the academic health science networks in the north to really drive and bring innovation and research to a population in need of innovation. A vast majority of our research happens in the southeast of this country. We were trying to make sure that those opportunities were coming to the north of England as well. And throughout that journey, I've seen these sort of different modalities of care, whether it be technology, therapeutics, digital, med devices, and something that always drove me was how do you bring these things together? And that's why, with my co-founders, we developed Closed Loop Medicine, as you say, a precision medicine company. I've been on a journey with them and now taking time out to be able to advise the industry, whether it be in healthcare delivery and service delivery in the NHS or into biotech and biopharma on how we bring some of these technologies that we were talking about earlier to life in a more precise technology-enabled way to bring forward the next generation of technologies for human health.
Can we kind of dig into that a little bit? The one thing that I'm quite curious about is the Northern Healthcare Alliance. I probably got the name of it slightly wrong. With that, there's quite big disparities between health outcomes in the north of England and south of England. Is that linked to precision medicine, or are there kind of many factors beyond that?
So we have health inequalities across the United Kingdom. We have them between South Kensington and Tower Hamlets. We have them between North and South. We have them between the different devolved nations. We do have a very stark health inequality between North England and South England. Some work that we did at the Northern Health Science Alliance showed that there was a 20% higher chance of dying under the age of 75 if you were born and lived in the north of England than in the southeast, which equated to 1 million people dying younger than they would have done in the north of England if they'd been given the same life opportunities as the south. Now, a lot of that is socioeconomic, and so very multifactorial. You can't pin it down to something as simple as precision medicine. But the one thing that really inspires me is that technology is a tool that we can use to democratize health and access to and provision of. And that, for me, is one of my big drivers is how do we reduce those health inequalities? How do we give everyone the same opportunities with a system as pioneering and forward-thinking as the NHS and something that's free at the point of care, and that we can enable everyone, regardless of their postcode, to have that same health expectancy.
And can you talk about closed-loop medicine as well a little bit? I guess the similarities I'm seeing is it's data-driven medicine, and rather than putting things, rather than treating in kind of a blanket case, you're starting to connect kind of data and information to how you go about treating people. Is that the kind of the right way of thinking about it?
The ethos and why we founded Closed Loop Medicine was to think about what happens between the very best doctor and the most engaged patient having a conversation about their care. And, if you've got a physician with plenty of time on their hands, which is not the case in the vast majority of health systems, including the NHS, and you have a very engaged and educated patient, which is also not always the case, what would that very best care look like? What would that dialogue, what would that loop look like between patient and physician? And then how could you take technology and emulate that? How could you capture the information that happens outside of the physician's encounter to be able to inform the decisions that are made? Because the vast majority of health happens outside of the health system. It happens when you're living your daily life. So how do you take tools, technologies, medical devices, capture data about the individual, and then map it back to make the right clinical decision? So in Closed Loop Medicine's case, what we were working on is capturing information to optimize the dose of the medicine, and specifically taking real-world data, and it depends on the condition of what data you'd need, linking it back to the pharmacology of the drug from the clinical trials that we spoke about earlier, and then linking the two to say, actually, you as an individual need this dose and you as an individual need that dose. And by doing that, you reduce side effects, you create a drug that's more tolerable for the patient to take, and hopefully that means the patients stay on therapy for longer and they manage their condition. So with Closed Loop Medicine, it was trying to really break down the silos between drug, digital, device, and pull it together and say, what does an integrated solution look like for the patient? And that's the journey that we were on with Closed Loop Medicine, and the journey that Closed Loop Medicine carries on with today.
Could you talk a little bit about like how it works? Like I'm a patient, I have, I don't know what, X disease, and then how does the data and the medicine and how do all those things come together?
The best example is something that we published in hypertension. There was a very old drug originally produced by Pfizer called amlodipine. It works by opening up your blood vessels, so your blood pressure drops. When it was brought to market back in the 90s, it was brought in 2 doses, 5 and 10. And what we had heard anecdotally from patients and doctors is that some patients were cutting, crushing, even nibbling tablets to get to the right dose. And what was happening is patients were taking the dose that they'd been prescribed, their blood pressure was dropping, but their ankles were swelling because all the blood rushed down to their feet. So you've now got somebody with a condition like hypertension, which doesn't have any major symptoms, with swollen ankles and a headache because they stopped taking the medicine. Now, in my book, no one should be nibbling a medicine in the 21st century. We should just know what the right dose is. So we conducted a clinical trial with 200 patients at Bart's Teaching Hospital, and with QM, and we, rather than give 5 and 10, we changed the formulation. So we used a liquid formulation that was more amenable to dosing. So we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we tried to find what I would call the Goldilocks dose, not too hot, not too cold, in terms of that balance between efficacy, the drug working, and the side effects. We published this data last year showing that the vast majority of patients were optimally controlled on a dose that was not 5 and not 10. The vast majority was below 5 milligrams. And we could then take patients who had started with a high blood pressure, get them to being controlled with no side effects by optimizing the dose. So in terms of the data, we were capturing their blood pressure. So patients were using a blood pressure monitor at home. They were then using an app, software as a medical device, to record how they were feeling, the side effects, when they were taking the medicine, the dose. And we were using that information to then work back to what should be prescribed. And that was sort of our way of closing the loop between the data that we could make available through new technologies, our understanding of the drug, and then getting the dose right, and hopefully making a more tolerable therapy for the patient. And that's one example of how it could be applied to an area like hypertension, which still remains the largest killer globally, and yet very little innovation has been brought to that. A similar model with different data collection could be applied to other disease areas.
Maybe kind of broadening that out a little bit. If we take a look at the landscape now of precision medicine, what does that kind of landscape look like? What's, say, happened over the last 2 to 3 years? Where is precision medicine happening? Where isn't it happening? What are the developments?
So I think there are some big trends that are helping us move this whole agenda forward. And I think we could probably have a conversation under the banner of precision medicine as sort of a working title. We're seeing a much needed push and acknowledgement of the needs of 50% of the population, which is women's health. National agendas, funding streams, and support from the venture capital community for what's loosely termed femtech, and companies that are working towards a better understanding of how all the technology we have can support women's health, but equally what more needs to be done for that. So I think that's a big change over the last few years we're starting to see. Do we need to do more? Yes. Yes, absolutely. But I think that's one of the changes that we're starting to see an uptick in. I think the other has been in the consumerization and commercialization, if you will, of the GLP-1 therapies. Personally, I think the GLP-1s, well, just for for everyone listening, the GLP-1s are the weight loss drugs. They're the Wegovy's, the Mounjaro. But these drugs have other benefits beyond weight loss in controlling HbA1c for diabetes, and they're now systematically being proven to have a big impact on cardiovascular disease. These therapies have been often deployed, particularly in the US and now across the UK and Europe, linked with what I'll call a digital wrapper. So a tool to help with diet, exercise, monitoring weight loss, monitoring side effects. And if you think about how pervasive these therapies have become in society, I mean, they're on the front page of the newspapers, it's incredible. I believe we'll have an expectation that patients will have been on a journey with a GLP product, and they'll then think, well, hang on, if I've had this full digital support around my GLP, why don't I have that for my hypertension? Why don't I have that for my diabetes? Why don't I have that for my COPD? I think there's an opportunity that the GLP-1s and the consumerization and the direct-to-consumer platforms that have been built around them to really bring a whole new approach and level of patient-led expectation for something that's more personalized, more tailored, and more digital experience. For me, I mean, there are lots of big trends we could talk about in this discussion. The two that get me really excited are us really starting to push on the women's health agenda, starting to think about how the GLP-1s open up a more personalized, precision, digitized approach to care.
Can we maybe let's jump into the GLP-1 example, because I think it's like a really tangible example. So as you articulated it there, the GLP-1s, they come in like an ejector pen, right? And people just inject them. And what you're saying effectively with the digital wrapper is that I can have kind of, as I get more information around, say, for example, my weight and my exercise, I might adjust my dosage. Is that kind of how it works?
No, so I'm saying something slightly different. First of all, yes, a number of them are injectables. The oral versions are becoming available too as well, and we're expecting those over the next few years from the big providers of those therapies. No, what I'm more thinking is, what I believe is going to happen is, for many of the patients who are taking these therapies, they will be monitoring themselves, their weight, their diet, their exercise alongside the therapy. And actually in the UK, the way that NICE has evaluated the therapies is that they have to come with a support package. So there are a number of digital providers doing coaching, monitoring, and supporting those patients on that journey. There will therefore, in my mind at least, and I can be wrong, there will be an expectation that if that's how that package of care is looked after, and I get the coaching, the support, I get a full digital journey, I'm not just sent into the wild after my clinical appointment, why doesn't that happen in other aspects of my care? And an element of it might be fine-tuning the dosing, yes, but I'm more thinking about an actual digitized experience of a medicine. If we look across society today, almost every industry has been transformed by digitization. Banking, movies, you name it. And I'm not the first one, and I'm not going to be the last one to say medicine and health are still somewhat behind. And I think to to bring that forward, we need something that's going to drive it. And I'm saying that I believe that GLP-1 therapies are going to be the driver of that digitization.
Because people will understand a lot more that they have to link the treatments that they have with other factors in their life. And it's not just about taking the medicine and everything's... That's not necessarily going to be the best way to...
That's why my belief is that is how there'll be a level of expectation for how care is delivered, how care is monitored, how individual patients are supported, and their therapy tailored to them.
And I'd like to kind of maybe broaden a little bit from, say, the GLP-1s, but because, when we were talking before, you were saying actually precision medicine isn't such a foreign thing. Like an anaesthetist will give a precision dose, or if you're on chemotherapy,
yes, exactly.
Or if you're on chemotherapy, there are precision doses given.
Or your insulin dosing for type 2 for a diabetic. This is not something that's the future. This is something that is done within care. It's just a question of how do we, back to the point on technology, democratize this and ensure that patients are getting the very best that they can from their medication.
And how do you think about like some of the places where it happens and some of the places it doesn't? Of course, like chemotherapy, or if I'm being anesthetized, then I've got a specialist there monitoring in real time. I'm in a hospital environment. Insulin's a little bit different because I'm able to test in real time in my home and adjust my dosage based on that. Why is it not kind of everywhere, or how do you differentiate these different disease areas?
So I come back to the earlier point, which is I think we're now at this tipping point where the technologies are more available to conduct the right remote monitoring, to capture the patient-reported outcome measures that are needed, whether it be interstitial fluid monitoring through a patch or other wearable technologies getting more and more advanced, and recognizing the need for regulatory approvals. So software as a medical device, ISO 13485 is a understood standard now that we have to get to. And what that means is not only have we got the technologies, but we're getting verifiable and reliable data coming through technologies that have been regulated, where the clinical community can start to say, I'm actually going to trust that data point, or it can be built into the clinical trials. And so we're going to see more and more and more of this happen, and it spread across. Where we see it go beyond, personally, I think we're going to see it in the cardiovascular and metabolic area, given what I've just said about the GLP-1s. But that's not to say it can't happen in other areas. One of the first companies I started and didn't quite get off the ground was thinking about how do you personalize HRT for hormone replacement therapy for women going through menopause. There are lots of different places that this could be taken, but we need the technologies, the reliable data, and the regulation and standards to enable the system more broadly to recognize those data points as reliable, so that the loop can be closed. And back to why we called it closed loop medicine in the first place. And the journey I've been on through working in health systems, working with policymakers, having built companies, I think an opportunity to think about how this can then be applied to health systems, to the pharmaceutical industry, in doing what everyone who works in healthcare wants, which is to improve patient outcomes.
We've talked a bit about the precision medicine maybe from a patient perspective. Is it going to help our health system as well?
By the very virtue of being precise rather than imprecise, yes. By minimizing side effects, by helping patients stay on therapy because you've reduced those effects, whether those effects are causing costs to the health system. I think there was a report on the adverse event cost to the NHS alone is equally in the billions, as well as just giving a better, what I like to call lived experience of the medicine, and so patients stay on therapy. The vast majority of medicines don't stay on therapy for long because of a whole range of factors to do with their association with medicines, but the tolerability of the medicine is a big driver. So yes, this isn't just about being able to focus on the individual. It's the societal benefits, as you say, for having precision medicine delivered at population health scale. And that's, I think, the aim that we should all be working towards. I think the other point would be that I think we've had this idea that precision medicine is some way off in the future, is only for the sort of the next generation oncology therapies. The way I like to think about it is almost just an ethos, a methodology, an approach that we should just be applying where possible to every individual, to every patient population, so long as we've got the right technologies and data to be able to support it.
Maybe we can jump into that a little bit. I definitely have my own experiences working within a pharma company, trying to introduce innovation into the kind of the clinical trial process. And it's actually kind of really hard, and there's a lot of resistance there. And part of the resistance is achieving a good outcome in a clinical trial is really hard enough as it is, and that's what kind of pharma companies are trying to do. If you start to introduce new and different and more innovative things as part of that trial, you're effectively putting the trial at risk. It's perceived as doing that. So that's a big barrier. Do you see other barriers as well, or do you have similar experiences?
So I think this idea around healthcare and pharma being sort of the last bastion of digitization comes down to a number of different factors, but the two I'd like to pick up on are digitizers and disruptors. And what I mean by that is there are a number of technologies companies that have brought technologies and solutions that take an existing process and effectively move it from paper to software. They digitize. And that is a more palatable intervention or innovation for health systems, for pharmaceutical companies, for biotech companies, because to your point, it's minimizing risk. It's not disrupting what they've done before. And if you look more broadly at the digital health market, we can come back to that term in a minute. I don't really agree with it being called digital health, but you and I have spoken about this before. If you look at the broad digital health market, where you've got adoption of these technologies, where it's been easier to work with partners, has been for those technologies that are digitizers. The harder ones, I think, where you're touching on are the disruptors, where you're fundamentally doing something different and you're introducing a new element of risk. And they're probably the companies that will have the biggest impact long term, whether it's in the way in which we think about clinical trials, whether it's about the way in which we deploy new commercial products in market. But there are certain restrictions, both from a buying side and a selling side, in terms of pharma being the partner for many of those companies in not wanting to introduce risk into clinical trials, which, as you say, equally in the time it takes to develop those technologies and have the financial support from investors to take them all the way through. What I think is one of the biggest barriers to your question is actually not the technology, it's not the regulation. I think the regulators are actually being really on the front foot with a lot of this. Look at what the FDA has done in this space and the MHRA as well. It's certainly not the patients, because they're demanding more and more and more. The bit that I think has been one of the biggest barriers is the business model of actually working out how you get valued for the innovation that you bring or the risk that you take away. And that, I think, is still one of the biggest barriers to bringing these technologies forward.
So the business model, as you talk about it, so I talk about business and commercialization of health being a really important thing. It's sometimes viewed a little bit taboo because health is supposed to be good for the individual, and commercialization always seems a little bit kind of money hungry and kind of focused on making money versus benefiting people. But I fundamentally believe that in order to create something scalable and sustainable, you need kind of money to make that work, and that's why it's really important to kind of commercialize these things, and you need a good business model. That's what it's all about. But when you think about the business model for precision medicine, what are the challenges there? Is it that, if you've got lower dosages, that drug companies aren't going to get paid as much for their drugs? Or is it that the providers, the hospitals don't want to kind of pay for these things? Or is it the technology providers making the technology that's supporting all this, they're not really in the financial reimbursement process at the moment, and we need to introduce that? Could you kind of expand that a little bit?
For me, it's which part of the system, and particularly which P, and I'll come back to the P in a moment, which P in the system you create the most value for. And then understanding your business model in the context of that. And what I mean by P is, do you benefit the farmer, the provider, the payer, the prescriber, or the patient? Which one of those are you ultimately benefiting? Now, it's hard in healthcare technology to find a solution that doesn't touch or benefit all of them. But which one is getting the most benefit? And that's and then within the context of that, how do they recognize that benefit? That's the biggest challenge. So if you think about technologies that are more useful for prevention, well, the impact it might have on a budget upstream might be saving money downstream. And if those budgets are separate, no one's going to be willing to pay more here if they don't see the benefit. And so this is where the business model question becomes really important in not only understanding who's getting the greatest value, pharma provider, payer, pharmacist, physician, patient, but also how do you capture that value with that individual or that individual organization. And that is something that is still really difficult to do because you have this spread of value across the environment. Now, that's not to say it's impossible. Obviously, there are lots of companies out there who are doing this very successfully, but it is one of the biggest challenges about getting that business model right.
And maybe pulling this back to your GLP-1 example, in that example, it's almost happening organically, right? The people are just trying to find their own way a little bit. They're using digital solutions or digital tools or technology that is kind of separate from like how the drug gets paid for. Is that do you agree with that personally?
No, I agree. So I think what we've seen with the GLPs is a real mixture. So you've got parts of the market where it's being prescribed for the thing that it needs to be prescribed for and is being used appropriately. You have this whole other side of the market, which is the compounding market. Don't suppose we go and talk about that just right this moment. You've got solutions like we have in the NHS where there are dedicated providers that have to come in alongside and provide the digital support. You've got companies in the US that are providing fully integrated digital wrappers to provide support for patients. And then, to your point, you've got a wild west of Instagram and TikTok and Reddit channels where people are working it out for themselves. They're doing N of 1 medicine for themselves, and it's pretty dangerous. This is a prescribed medicine, and you can find the Reddit channels, you can find the TikTok channels on how to personalize your care. That's deeply concerning. And so we have this odd scenario where you've got almost both ends of the extreme. You've got traditional one-size-fits-all approach. You have a hyper-personalized approach being taken by another group in society. And then you've got something in the middle, which is, I think, really starting to bring drug digital device together to be able to support patients in a holistic way. So I think that this is why I believe the GLPs offer this sort of sledgehammer to crack the nut scenario of how we digitize care, because it's forcing us to think differently.
Are people really using TikTok to figure out what their GLP-1s should be? They are. Is that happening at scale in a big way?
Yes, you will go down a rabbit hole. But after this, go and have a look.
Holy smoke. And Reddit as well, huh?
Yeah.
All right. That seems nuts. But in some respects it's nuts, but also it's showing, this is your point, isn't it? It's illustrating that there's a need and a thirst.
It's telling you something. It's clearly, I don't want to call these individuals nuts. That's not appropriate.
Yeah.
But there is a desire for them to get it right for them as the individual. And I think that's a big signal for us in a society where everything is ever more personalized, ever more hyper-personalized, that this is the direction of travel.
That's really huge, the patient desire. That's really massive, right? Because you, in some respects, you hear this a lot in kind of technologies, digital technologies, these types of things that, patients are somewhat resistant. It can be complicated for people. People don't have access to the technology. But I think the picture that you've painted there is completely the opposite. It's like people are kind of seeking out because in some respects the companies, the health companies that could or should be doing this and maybe letting them down a little bit?
I don't think they're letting them down. I think they're working to the regulations and the requirements that have been placed on them, and things are moving forward. And there are a number of companies out there that are doing the exact opposite. They're providing the support and infrastructure to help patients. There is a sub-cohort of individuals who are taking it to an absolute extreme. But it also shows that there is a risk of accentuating the health inequality of those who can get access to something that's more personalised and those who can't. And that's my point of, one of the things that keeps me going is that this idea that we have the tools and technologies available to us to be able to lift population health at a much greater level if we can drive the accessibility and availability of those technologies, whether they be drug, digital device, or integrated to the population.
Can we just keep going on this point a little bit? Because it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in a way. I'm not saying you're not making sense, but kind of intuitively, we think if the patient demand is there, of course, providers and physicians want to treat patients with the best possible outcome. The companies providing solutions, whether it's drugs or whether it's digital, they also want to provide the best products possible. What's breaking in this process?
Great question. I think what's breaking is status quo. I think we are, I don't mean to sort of overly use this phrase, I think we are at a tipping point. We're seeing the advancement and accessibility and availability of digital solutions that have now been proven to work time and time again with solid randomized controlled trials behind them. We're seeing connected devices that are now producing highly reliable data. We're seeing a mass demand for these products, both from individuals, but also from a health systems perspective. These are therapeutics that could have huge population health advantages because of their impact on cardiovascular disease. I think you're just seeing all of these individual components coming to the fore, and it's really exciting. It's really positive, really positive. And there are things that it's challenging, but what's great is you're seeing companies embrace that. You're seeing patient groups embrace that. And this is why I genuinely believe it's going to be a defining moment for what I hope we see, which is the abolition of the word digital health or phrase digital health, because in the 21st century, it's just health.
So that's fantastic. That probably brings us on to a little bit the future, right? So from your perspective, we're kind of at the cusp of, we're just in that kind of complicated point where things are about to change. If we were to project, say, 10 years forward, 2035, things are going as you kind of see them in this kind of precision medicine world. What could the future look like? What would maybe my experience be as a patient that's maybe different from today?
I think we've done quite well to get this far without talking about AI, and it would be remiss of us not to. But I'll start with a little anecdote, or a self-belief, not an anecdote. I have 3 very young children. I want to see a world where they come and question me in 10, 15 years' time and say, when you went to the doctors, Papa, and you were prescribed a medicine, did they just give it to you without knowing if it was going to work? That's mad. I want that moment to happen. I want to be sat there with my children and hear that, because then I will know that we've had the AI-enabled clinical decision support tools that have helped physicians make the right decision on the spot. Then I'll know that we've had, the ambient scribes being writ large across health systems, providing time back to patients and physicians to have a proper, meaningful dialogue. That we would have had the AI technology solutions to better identify and scan images for detection of lesions, for example. Then I will know that we have got a fully personalised experience for the patient beyond picking up their prescription. That's the world I see, that looking back on today will be seen as somewhat archaic in the way that we deliver care.
I love that question so much. I hear it. My youngest daughter's 17. I hear it all the time about all sorts of things. That way that you've articulated that when I go and see a doctor, they know whether something's going to work or not. That's a really kind of powerful thought. We had a conversation here a few weeks ago. We were talking about cancer and the way cancer treatment could transform. And a little bit the conversation I was having with Dr. Leonard Lee was that if everything goes right in his mind, diagnostics work so well that we catch cancer at a much earlier time, then the treatments are less harsh and much more routine, and then suddenly the fear goes out of cancer because it's no longer a life-threatening disease. It's fairly routine, and it's kind of treated early before it does any harm. How does that work in a precision medicine I guess that's precision medicine as well, right?
You kind of answer your own question, but I think that's a wonderful vision for the future of not just caring for patients with cancer, but caring for all conditions. In that we detect early, we intervene with the appropriate intervention, we monitor and we support that patient, and if we can cure, we cure. If not, we manage, and we do that in such a way that patients have a better life expectancy. We reduce the cost of the healthcare burden on society, and the individual feels like they've truly been treated as such.
How do you think that kind of looks in reality? Do I walk around with my little AI helper telling me that not to have a drink, but to walk faster, and I've got these prompts happening all the time, and there's something kind of being a bit more kind of proactive, that some data going to the doctor if I do need to go and seek treatment? What does your kind of lived experience look like in this world?
I think my lived experience in that world probably starts completely independently of technology. And I say that because whilst I believe that technology can be democratized and utilized to support patients in a much more meaningful way, we will not get to that world that you've described and that I believe is possible without changing dialogue with not just patients but the population. Really focusing on health literacy and educating and supporting, because one of the biggest drivers of health outcomes is and are socioeconomic and educational level. So you can throw all the technology, the AI pins, the in the background clinical decision support tools, the algorithms, you can put all of that technology, and we have a lot of it already. But if you're not supporting patients in communities that don't understand the implications of the decisions they're making on their long-term health, haven't been given the support and the coaching needed, then we failed. So for me, of course, there is this idealized world of a sort of fully quantified self with remote monitoring and telling you to quickly go and get that seen to. But there's something more important, because if we don't do that piece on the health literacy, the education, the working with citizens, that technology risks only accentuating the inequality we see between those who can have access, both in terms of affordability and understanding, and those who can't, and that would be a disaster.
Data availability makes that much more possible. I suppose in my head, I'm kind of projecting this world where at an individual level, I told the individual story. I've got my little AI thing, and that's telling me what to do. But if I kind of aggregate that on a population level, and people who are making health decisions for the country have access to that data, what that then enables is us to invest in areas that really have the biggest impact, because it's it is at an individual level, but also we can do it at population level as well. And we talked, when you started off, we didn't jump into this much, the women's health arena, but a topic like that where a large percentage of the population are massively underserved and have really poor outcomes in really some areas. Something that should really come to the fore in a world where we have such kind of rich data links to true health outcomes.
I completely agree with you, and simply put, data saves lives. And that was the name of a campaign that we supported when I was at the Northern Health Science Alliance to get the word out that health data and availability of that data, actually not just health data, I'll come back to that, saves lives. There is a concern around, obviously, data privacy, data sharing, this idea that my data might be sold. We ran a program in the north of England called Connected Health Cities, which was funded by the Department of Health, to look at the integration of health data with what we loosely termed civic data, so other data around how you live in your civic society, to be able to create actionable insights for interventions in particular streets, in particular regions, aspects of the north of England. One of the really magical things we did was we ran citizens' juries. And a citizens' jury is where you have a number of people come in who represent the demographics of that local region. And you run a jury. You put to them a case, and we put to them a case about the use of data, whether it be for direct care about them, indirect care, their data being used to help someone else, or commercialization. And we asked them to effectively come together and form an opinion as a jury at day one. Then over a couple of days, we bring inputs from experts, expert witnesses, and then ask them to vote again. Their views changed once they had been through that process. They'd moved from, actually, I would like my data to be used for other reasons, so whether it be direct care, indirect care, or commercial. And so this conversation around data will only be possible with citizen trust. And I think this comes back to my point on health literacy and understanding. If we can get citizen trust, because when you speak to most patients, I think there was work done with cancer patients many years ago, they want their data to be used, they want to get onto the clinical trial, they want that access. So you don't need to focus on the patients, you need to focus on the citizens. If you can build that citizens' trust around a whole campaign of data saves lives, then you're in an environment where all of these other things that you and I've been speaking about for the last hour or so are possible. Because that's what unlocks this whole opportunity, whether it be in women's health or anywhere else for that matter. But we need to be able to have that. Now, there's a great example of where people give their data absolutely willingly in the NHS, the blood service. People donate their blood, and I'm going to be a little bit flippant here, but they donate their blood, and yes, of course, they have the gift of knowing that that's going to help someone, but they donate their blood for the gift of knowing someone and a biscuit. That is, and there are blood centres in Stratford near where I live. What they're actually giving is their data. And if we could think about a patient donating their blood, saving one life, and versus a patient donating their data and saving thousands. I'd love this idea of us being able to be data donators, to be able to create that environment where the appropriate, with the right ethical and otherwise consent, can act to create that environment you describe of the highly informed, early diagnostic, preventative environment with the earlier interventions. But I just don't think any of that's possible without us bringing the citizens on that journey with us.
That's really powerful, being data donators. It's a really powerful thought. I've seen a lot of kind of similar, more anecdotal. Your example is a very clear, evidence-driven example. I've seen a lot of anecdotal data where people are totally prepared to give their health data across, as long as it's used for good reasons and not for nefarious reasons. Of course, there are a bunch of sort of negative things that you hear around, how data could be used poorly, that you get refused insurance because...
Too much of an optimist here, thinking just about the positive influences and positive actors. Of course, all of that has to be dealt with.
But I don't think you're being too much of an optimist. I think that's just about putting the right assurances in place. The other thing I think a little bit is, this is a bit of a trite example. I think of the cookie example. Like everyone was fearful of, you click on a website and now you have to kind of check those boxes to approve cookies on a website. That came in place because everyone was fearful of cookies, and largely no one knew what a cookie was other than it was kind of tracking their data. Now everyone's got that annoying pop-up that they have to just click accept all to. Yeah. I think they'd rather go back to the old world. So it's not. I feel it's a very trite example, but I feel like it's also reflective of with this is your point, with understanding and knowing that things are done really for a reason, and that reason is explained. People want to share. People, want to do good for society. I really, truly believe that. So I feel like it's about putting the assurances in place as well as educating people.
Yeah. And I hopefully believe that to be true too, that people want to be able to contribute. But equally, if you don't, that's fine too. But let's give people that that option. Let's create an environment where we have a whole movement of believing that by donating my data in the same way as donating my blood, I'm helping save someone's life.
Yeah. I suppose the other sort of, just following on from that, it doesn't matter, we don't need everyone to do it. If 20% of the population did it, that would be an amazing data set, right?
And actually, here in the UK, we're in an amazing position to do that. We've got a cradle to grave longitudinal healthcare record linked to your patient ID. We've got amazing programs like our Future Health, UK Biobank to be able to build upon. And so we could be looking at the place to be able to do this, to not only have a positive impact on people and patients in the United Kingdom, but globally, because we're such a multicultural society that it would be odd if we couldn't support research into the right genetic background of lots of different people from across the UK that would be applicable to global health populations. And so, that could be, our gift to the world, our industrial revolution again, which is one of health data.
Maybe this brings us back to like what would need to be true for this vision to happen. So I loved your anecdote about, your projected anecdote that your daughter's going to ask you, in 15 years' time, hey, when you went to a doctor, did they actually know whether what they were going to do for you works or not? Like, that's a beautiful vision, man. Like, what are maybe say some of the headwinds there that we have to overcome and some of the tailwinds that make it feel like it's possible?
I'm a perpetual optimist, so I feel like the tailwinds are there supporting us. And I believe genuinely that the headwinds will only remain if we don't just keep consistently moving all of this forward. Many might argue that the headwinds might be regulatory. I think that actually the regulators are working in a really progressive way towards this. Many would argue that the systems, the juggernauts, whether it be health systems or the pharma industry, are too big. I think we're starting to see some real breakthrough innovations being adopted. I think with an army of the coalition of the willing, which is what you find in both health systems, whether it be in the commercial, whether it be in startups. I think the thing that will get us there is us remembering that it's not just entrepreneurs in companies and founders doing this. It's the entrepreneurs like you were in pharma trying to bring technology in, like the entrepreneurs that we see from nurses all the way to consultants in the NHS who are innovating and bringing things in. It's getting them, that system, to work together. And for me, that's what will solve it. It won't come from a company. It won't come from an individual or institution. It comes from an ecosystem of people who maybe not have exactly the same vision as I do, but they've got one that hopefully is similar, and we're all moving towards that together.
Hakim, thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for letting me share this with you.